All right, you beautiful humans, is comparing the M1 MacBook Air to the M1 iPad Pro really a fair comparison, especially since the MacBook Air is the one that has the native calculator app? I mean, seriously, I have definitely seen the comments out there that state that this is just an unrealistic comparison between the two of these devices because they are really different. But I also see the community weighing these particular buying decisions. So if the community is actually interested in this and curious, so am I, and I think that's fine. But of course, aside from the hardware, which I'll actually talk a little bit about this later, but yes, you can run some iPadOS apps on the M1 Mac. But this functionality does not flip back over to iPad as far as supporting macOS. We already know that. And macOS and iPadOS are really just two different sandboxes that you play in separately with some overlap here and there. But you know, with WWDC really a couple of sleeps away by the time you're actually watching this video, I think this is just kind of a moot point that we're just gonna have to table for right now, wait for that event, and then we can kind of flip back over here and talk about it again. Now, of course, starting off with the price, $999 US for the MacBook Air as far as the base model is concerned, and you can actually hit up the Apple refurbished store or on online deal for around $849 US, and I think that is a killer deal. But what we do need to do is, for comparison's sake, as far as screen real estate is concerned, we are talking about the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. And as far as the storage is concerned, we need to bump that up to 256 gigs of internal. So by doing that, then we're ringing in at about $1199 US, and that's without any peripherals. So why don't we just go ahead and add in the Magic Keyboard here at $349 US, or we could use a less expensive option from Logitech, which is the Combo Touch at $199 US. And of course, there are certainly more budget-friendly options here, I know, but what we're trying to do is we're comparing what is very similar between the two, and I think that either the Smart Keyboard or the keyboard from Logitech are basically evening this out as far as what you can do, setting it up on a table, on your lap, and getting that kind of mobile work done. And of course, the decision for many of you at that price point has probably already been made, and you're out, and I'll see you on the next one. Now, they do both have Thunderbolt 3 connectivity, although the MacBook Air is the one that has the two ports, while the iPad Pro just has the one. But that's okay with me because I really utilize my Thunderbolt hub when I'm kind of more docked, and my external SSD enclosures, which thankfully I can use my Thunderbolt 3 enclosures on both of these devices. However, just as a heads up, from the testing on these controllers on both of these M1 chips, they're actually not performing at the advertised 40 gigabits per second throughput, although it is possible on the MacBook Air to bump that performance up even more when using a powered hub that pushes that communication protocol when multiple peripherals and SSDs are performing multiple tasks simultaneously. Although I did attempt this on the iPad Pro, it did seem to be pretty much limited both by the hardware, but also the software, since iPadOS really is limited by that true multitasking. And of course, if you're new here and really aren't aware of what in the world I'm actually talking about, I'll link up a couple of videos that I've done, like where I've done these tests. But the very abridged, very short version here is that you really do need to slam these controllers on the chip itself to get a better performance out of it. Now, of course, diving into the performance, I always benchmark video editing, and I have been able to easily manage cinema camera footage on both of these devices, although most with a cinema camera would likely not be cutting on these devices anyway. However, I actually was pleased to recently see Gene Nagata, who is, if you know him as Potato Jet, he was actually working with his Arri Alexa footage on the base M1 MacBook Air using a beta version of Adobe Premiere. Now, granted, there were some slight workarounds that he had to put into play there, but it actually did pretty well for him. And of course, when we talk about the iPad Pro, LumaFusion is continuing to get better and really more robust, and I'm really curious to see what is going to be coming in the next several months, and I am very thankful for them because they're out there moving that needle. Now, what seems to really be taking over people's feeds here is that Liquid Retina XDR display, which it is stunning. And I try really hard, I try really hard to temper my excitement because I do like to really bring some balance to the conversation because yeah, it's the difference in these displays is noticeable. But that is definitely not to say that the overall experience on the MacBook Air will be unpleasant, not in the least. It's just when you put them side by side, it is noticeable. And with that display also really just being gorgeous, not to mention that although the iPad Pro supports mirroring via an external display, with some of those apps taking advantage of the full display, depending on your display, because my ultra wide, you're still going to be boxed in, but you'll not really have any issues driving a display with the MacBook Air and getting that full aspect ratio to really take advantage of the screen real estate versus the iPad Pro being boxed in on the sides with pretty much most of the apps. But the display on the iPad Pro is just hands down something you have to see. You just have to see it because the camera that I film in, the editing, the YouTube compression, it just doesn't help. It doesn't really give you that full experience. And this isn't about me just negating about the M1 MacBook Air's display. It's still beautiful. It's just when they're side by side, you notice it. And remaining on that consumption, there are the speakers. Now for editing or any serious audio work that I do, I don't really care for any of the internal speakers on most of these devices, because when it comes to correction, I do actually recommend studio monitors, whether you have those as speakers up on the desk or something that you have monitors over your ears. But when listening to something that you're not trying to edit and you're just trying to like enjoy that audio, so the iPad Pro is probably more preferable, but we also don't need to spend too much time on these cameras either, because one is a potato versus a baked potato. So really what it comes down to, regardless, just dial in your lighting. If you got decent lighting, it'll certainly help your camera. So let's actually just move on from that. And of course, something that really is amazing is how incredible the M1 MacBook Air's battery life is. And sure, you're actually getting all-day battery on both of these devices. However, that liquid Retina XDR seems to be sucking up all the juice of the larger battery in the iPad Pro, because the MacBook Air, it's going to perform for you all day, and it'll even spill over into the next day. But that's, of course, depending on what you're actually doing with it. So if you're doing some heavy video editing, probably not, but still, that battery life is something that I adore. But I've got two things here that I really kind of want to round out on. And one of them, you may have to actually wrap your head around just a little bit further, just to stretch just a little bit further. But one, I actually personally prefer the Mac Mini, which coming in at a much lower starting cost than the MacBook Air, especially when you look in the refurbished store, and then pairing that with the iPad Pro, that being more of a complementary set of tools to really get those things done. I think that is the killer combo right here. And you might say, yeah, but then you actually have to purchase the external monitor, the keyboard, and the mouse. And to that, I do say, I really do agree with you. But if you really know me, then you would know that my response would be, but yes, Nikki26. However, I can use that external monitor and also my Logitech MX keys or my MX Master 3 or a handful of other peripherals that have easy Bluetooth switching for the iPad Pro as well. So I can also use that sidecar functionality on the iPad Pro to get that second display on the Mac Mini. Although if you're really wondering whether you can have a third display with the MacBook Air, the answer is yes. So you can connect the external monitor either to the Mini or the MacBook Air, and then add in an iPad Pro as an additional display. And now to really stretch here on the price of the iPad Pro, because here is where the thinking may need to be tweaked just a little bit, but try not to break yourself. Now I look at everything in either a time savings, but I also often look at how often I use something. The more I use it, the lower the cost per use that it actually starts to become. And so yes, when you add in all of the peripherals of the iPad Pro, the extra things that you need, and comparing that to the MacBook Air per use, now of course the MacBook Air per use is going to be lower, but let's actually just take the work component out of it. Because if you really enjoy consuming content, gaming, reading, or any other consumption behavior, yes, you can do just about all of that on the MacBook Air, but is it as enjoyable as it is on the iPad? Because maybe you're able to more easily delineate here that this device, the iPad Pro, you're able to get work done, but then it also is a really enjoyable experience for the things that you really enjoy doing and really want to do when you're actually not working. So in this case, if it's actually getting a lot of use, whether daily or almost daily, then does it start to become a more reasonable price point because you actually enjoy it for what it is? I mean, honestly here, folks, I would love to know. I know it's expensive, I get it, but it is really built well, and I think, generally speaking, it serves the purpose that it was built for. But as far as comparing these two devices, I just don't think that it's really that simple. And I think that this is where Apple may want to make sure that we divide our time in each of the sandboxes for now. But I would really love to know your thoughts below or over there on Twitter. More importantly, go do those things that matter, rock those faces, and I'll see you right back here on the next one.